A man who was sentenced to die, literally was on death row, has had all charges against him dropped.
Case of this guy named Clemente Aguirre. And if I tell you this story, you'll say, you gotta be making this. It can't be true.
Started in 2004 when the Honduran immigrant was accused of killing two women, a mother and her adult daughter.
Let's start with the case of Clemente Aguirre, a man who spent more than a decade on death row for a crime he didn't commit. It all began when the Honduran immigrant was accused of the gruesome murders of his two neighbors, Carol Barras, 68, and her daughter, Cheryl Williams, 47. The two women were found brutally stabbed to death in their home in Altamonte Springs, Florida in 2004.
From the start, Aguirre Harkin said he found the women dead, that he tried to help, and that's how their blood got on his clothes and his footprints on the murder scene.
Despite protesting his innocence from the start,
I didn't do it. I don't kill nobody.
Clemente was quickly indicted for first-degree murder and burglary. The prosecution claimed the evidence pointed directly to him. Bloodstains on his clothing, his footprints leading from the victim's house, and no other suspects seemed viable. As a result, Clemente was sentenced to death. However, Clemente never gave up hope. Determined to clear his name and prove his innocence, he fought for years. DNA testing revealed a shocking discovery. It wasn't Clemente's DNA at the crime scene, but someone else's.
What were the results of that blood test? You know how many drops of blood they tested? Not a single drop of blood. They never tested a single drop.
The evidence pointed to Cheryl Williams' daughter, who had a history of emotional struggles.
Within inches of the mother's body and in a bathroom where the state argued the killer cleaned up is the daughter's blood, a trail of the daughter's blood going to the bathroom, and then the mother's blood on the outside of the daughter's window.
In fact, on several occasions, she had allegedly confessed to the crime, telling people what had really happened.
We did just a minimal investigation into the daughter, and it turns out that it was in the doctor's notes a few years before this happened where she says to her mother, I'm gonna you if I ever get out of here, I'll all of you. Then we find out that she has confessed all over town.
Despite this crucial information, Clemente still had to wait years before his case could be reopened. But when it finally was, the new evidence cleared his name. After spending nearly 14 years behind bars, with 11 of those years on death row, Clemente was finally freed. On his release day, surrounded by loved ones, he could hardly contain his emotion.
And I thank you for it, from the bottom of my heart. Today is a brighter day, a new day, and I got good hopes for the future.
Next up, we have the story of Ricky Jackson, a man who spent nearly 4 decades in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Ricky was only 18, living in Cleveland, Ohio, when he was arrested, all based on the word of a single witness, Eddie Vernon, a young teenager at the time. Eddie later admitted that he didn't actually witness the murder and that police had pressured him into testifying against Ricky, which ultimately sealed his fate. Ricky was initially sentenced to die in the electric chair, but after 2 years on death row, his sentence was changed to life in prison. Fast forward almost 40 years, and Eddie, now an adult, finally came forward with the truth, admitting he never saw the crime take place. With no evidence left against him, Ricky's charges were dropped. In a powerful moment, he stood in court hearing those life-changing words. Mr. Jackson is free to go.
Mr. Jackson, you're going to be free to go. I suggest to you that life is filled with small victories, and this is a big one. I wish you good luck. Thank you, Your Honor.
Now out in the world as a free man, Ricky received compensation of $1 million from the state of Ohio, with an additional $2.5 million for lost income. A small token for the decades stolen from him, but a step toward justice.
I'm very happy, needless to say. You know, words can't express how I feel right now. I'm just glad to be out, glad to be a free man.
Next up, we have the story of John Bunn, a man who faced an unimaginable journey after being wrongfully convicted at just 14 years old. In 1991, John Bunn and another teenager were accused of being involved in the murder of an off-duty corrections officer in Brooklyn, New York. The case relied heavily on questionable evidence and the testimony of a single eyewitness, who later admitted to having doubts about what he saw. Bunn was sentenced to prison despite being a child and ended up spending 17 years behind bars before being released on parole, still carrying the heavy label of a convicted murderer. Determined to clear his name, John fought tirelessly for years to prove his innocence.
I want y'all to know that y'all convicted and had a wrong man in prison.
In 2018, a judge finally overturned his conviction, citing false evidence and a flawed investigation conducted by Detective Louis Scarcella, whose controversial methods had been linked to numerous wrongful convictions.
No, I don't remember.
In an emotional scene, Bunn broke down in court as his name was finally cleared after more than 2 decades of fighting. John's resilience didn't end with his exoneration. He dedicated himself to helping others facing similar injustices by founding a nonprofit organization aimed at bringing books and educational resources to incarcerated youth. Additionally, he filed a lawsuit against the city of New York, resulting in a settlement of $5.9 million. His story serves as a powerful testament to the will to fight for justice, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Eric Kelly and Ralph Lee are 2 more men whose lives were stolen by a wrongful conviction. In 1993, Tito Marino, the owner of a video store in New Jersey, was murdered in a violent robbery gone wrong. Eric and Ralph were soon arrested and convicted, based on coerced confessions and a sketchy eyewitness account. For years, they sat in prison, protesting their innocence, but no one listened. It wasn't until the Innocence Project got involved that things began to change. They found that the DNA evidence at the crime scene didn't match either of the men. In fact, the DNA belonged to another suspect entirely, someone the police never bothered to investigate.
And the state has just dug in their heels ever since. They refused to investigate this other person, refused to talk to him, didn't look into his history, and instead are just, blindly clinging to this conviction at all costs.
Finally, after 24 years, Ralph Lee was released from prison. Eric Kelly, however, had to wait a little longer. He wasn't freed until 2018, after spending 26 years behind bars.
And DNA has proven the defendant or defendants not guilty, notwithstanding a confession. Therefore, in light of the foregoing reasons, the motion for a new trial as to both defendants, Ralph Lee and Eric Kelly, is hereby granted.
When the day finally came, Eric and Ralph were overjoyed, though their joy was tempered by the knowledge of all they had lost.
Like we always said, we was innocent, and we proved that today. You know what I mean?
That was pretty clear.
The indictment is dismissed. That was my, I said we won.
It's a very beautiful day, I'm happy, that it's all over me now. I can just begin, starting, my life off, anew, and that's about it. I'm happy. I'm very, very happy.
After their exoneration, Eric Kelly and Ralph Lee pursued legal action against the state and were awarded a combined settlement of $1.9 million for the injustices they endured during their wrongful imprisonment. This is the story of Daniel Villegas, who spent over 2 decades fighting a wrongful conviction for a double homicide he never committed in El Paso, Texas. In 1993, when Daniel was just 16 years old, he was arrested for a drive-by shooting that left 2 teenagers dead. During his interrogation, Daniel says he was threatened by an El Paso detective who warned him of beatings and the death penalty if he didn't confess. Under this immense pressure, Daniel signed a confession written by the detective, though he tried to retract it only hours later. Tragically, his signed confession, despite being the only evidence, sealed his fate. The first trial ended with a hung jury, but the second led to his conviction and a life sentence. It wasn't until years later that Daniel was given a 3rd trial, where he would finally have a fair chance to prove his innocence.
If the defendant will please stand. Verdict Form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of... You are no longer under any conditions in this court. You are free to leave. Good luck.
Since then, Daniel has been working to help others facing similar situations. He also filed a lawsuit against the city of El Paso, seeking justice for the years he lost. His story shows the power of resilience and the fight for justice, even when hope seems out of reach.